When you hear the word revolution, what do you picture? Probably crowds in the streets, right? Toppling a corrupt government, maybe tearing down the statue of a dictator.
Yeah, that's the classic image.
Exactly. This is the classic idea of revolution, the kind thinkers like John Locke endorsed. It's essentially a political reset button. When the government breaks the social contract, the people have the right, Locke argued, to fire the government and install a new one.
It sounds neat, tidy, very focused on the political machinery itself.
It is neat, it's tidy, and it's focused on politics. But what if the problem isn't the government? What if the government is working perfectly, exactly as intended, but the very system it's designed to protect is the real source of injustice?
That's a deeper question.
Right. What if the thing that truly limits your freedom isn't a law passed in Parliament, but maybe the simple fact of your job? The division of labor that, some argue, turns a person from a subject into an object, just a mere cog in a machine.
Okay, so you're saying the problem might be more fundamental than just who's in charge politically.
Precisely. A new way of thinking came along, looked at the bustling factories, the growing divide between the rich and poor, and made a really radical claim. Focusing on changing the government is like trying to fix a crooked picture frame while ignoring that the whole house is built on a slant.
That's a powerful analogy. So changing the frame doesn't fix the foundation.
Exactly. To truly change things, according to this view, you don't just need a political revolution. You need to upend the entire economic foundation of society itself. Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into some pretty big ideas about how our world works, or, sometimes doesn't.
Big ideas indeed, foundational stuff.
We'll explore concepts from thinkers like John Locke and Adam Smith, and then see how radical critiques, particularly from a Marxist perspective, challenge our understanding of wealth, power, and inequality, especially now in the 21st century.
And try to make sense of how those critiques still resonate, or maybe don't today.
Our mission today is really to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from a lot of thinking on this, helping you navigate these complex currents of economic thought and societal transformation.
Yeah.
So we've opened with this provocative idea of revolution, not just political, but economic. To truly grasp why that distinction matters, we have to start by understanding the bedrock of this revolutionary thought, Marxism.
Right, the starting point.
For centuries, when we talked about politics, we were pretty narrow in our focus, weren't we? It was all about the formal governing institutions, the parliament, the courts, the executive branch.
That was the universe of politics, basically.
Yeah. The assumption was if you want change, you tweak the laws, you vote new people in, maybe you even stage a coup to replace one government with another. The levers of power were seen as inherently political.
What's truly fascinating here, though, is how Marxism fundamentally upends that conventional wisdom. It argues that limiting the scope of politics to just those institutions, well, it misses the forest for the trees.
How so?
Instead, it expands the concept of political power and social transformation to encompass society as a whole, starting, most crucially, with its economic foundation.
Okay. So politics isn't just government buildings and laws.
Exactly. The grand system here shifts the entire perspective. It's not if politics changes, society changes, but rather a far more profound idea that if society changes, then politics changes.
So the economy is the driver, essentially.
That's the core argument.
Okay.
This isn't just a slight adjustment in focus. It's a complete reorientation of how we understand power, structure, and the very mechanics of societal transformation. It means the real action, the real drivers of change are deeply embedded in how we organize our economic lives.
That's a powerful shift in perspective. And this deeper understanding, this belief that the economic base drives everything else, is precisely why Marxism then declares that mere reforms through existing institutions just won't cut it.
Right, because you're just tinkering with the surface.
Exactly. If the fundamental structure of society, especially its economic base, how wealth is produced and distributed, is the problem, then just tweaking a few laws or swapping out one leader for another is like trying to patch a leaky dam with, a tiny piece of chewing gum.
It's insufficient, a Band-Aid on a major wound.
It requires a total societal overhaul, what some refer to as a negation of politics. It implies that true lasting change demands uprooting and transforming the entire social fabric from the ground up, because the political system is seen as merely a superstructure built upon and serving the existing economic base.
To really understand why Marxists came to such a radical conclusion, we have to rewind a bit and look at the economic ideas that were absolutely dominant in their time. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the widespread acceptance of economic liberalism, an ideology largely founded on classical economists like Adam Smith.
Adam Smith, yeah. The Wealth of Nations.
Exactly. Before Smith stepped onto the stage, the reigning economic philosophy was mercantilism. Governments back then were obsessed with accumulating precious metals, gold and silver, believing that was the ultimate measure of national wealth.
Right. Hoard the gold, export everything, import nothing.
Pretty much. The prevailing strategy was to export as much as possible, flood other nations with your goods, and fiercely restrict imports. It was a zero-sum game, often at the expense of ordinary citizens, favoring merchants and large landowners who benefited from state-sponsored monopolies.
Absolutely. Smith, with his groundbreaking work like The Wealth of Nations, came along and basically dropped a bombshell. He argued that true national wealth isn't about how much gold you hoard in a vault. It's about the total amount of goods and services a nation produces, what we now call GDP.
A revolutionary idea in itself.
Totally. To maximize this, he said, governments should essentially step back and let individuals pursue their own self-interest in a free market. No protecting domestic industries with tariffs, no trade restrictions, just embrace free trade.
Let the market work its magic.
Yeah. This, he believed, would naturally promote the international division of labor, where countries specialize in what they do best, making production far more efficient and ultimately increasing overall wealth for everyone. His famous invisible hand theory suggested that individuals pursuing their own self-interest would, as if guided by an unseen force, inadvertently benefit society as a whole.
And the division of labor was central to that.
For Smith, the division of labor was a wonderfully positive thing, leading to incredible efficiency gains. Think about his famous pin factory example, right? Where breaking down production into small steps drastically increased output. The state's role: minimal. National defense, law and order, facilitating transactions, maybe providing some public goods like roads.
And this vision was incredibly influential.
Hugely. It was eagerly adopted by the burgeoning industrial capitalists, influencing British policy significantly and laying the groundwork for the modern capitalist era.
So, while this economic liberalism undeniably contributed massively to the development of capitalism and the impressive increase in national wealth, particularly in Britain after the Industrial Revolution, well, it also inadvertently created a profound, almost tragic contradiction.
Which was?
It led to widening disparities within society, a situation that directly contradicted the modern ideal of equality that was also gaining powerful traction thanks to Enlightenment ideals. You had these two powerful ideas, economic growth and human equality, kind of pulling in opposite directions.
So the rising tide didn't lift all boats equally?
Not at all. This growing inequality didn't just cause minor friction. It escalated into deep internal societal conflict. The wealthy, often seeing the poor as mere objects or tools to be used in production rather than fellow subjects deserving of equal dignity and respect, deepened these divides.
That objectification point is harsh, but probably accurate in many cases.
Yeah. The market, which was supposed to be this ideal, harmonious mechanism for allocating resources and promoting general welfare, was clearly not preventing and, in fact, was contributing to these growing social fissures, leading to widespread poverty and worker exploitation in the burgeoning industrial cities.
This brings us to a really fundamental point about private property and labor and how different thinkers viewed it. John Locke, another incredibly influential figure we mentioned, offered a powerful theory of property that still underpins many of our legal systems today.
Locke's labor theory of property, right?
Exactly. For Locke, natural resources only become usable, and thus justly acquired property, when human labor is mixed with them. You take a piece of wild land, you farm it, you build a house on it, it becomes yours, because you've infused it with your effort.
Makes intuitive sense. Your work creates the value, so you own it.
Private property rights, backed by this labor, were, for Locke, inviolable fundamental human rights, essential for liberty. The market, then, was seen as the embodiment of economic activities carried out by these free, equal, and independent individuals. It was, in theory, a fair exchange among equals.
In stark contrast, Marx critically examined this very foundation of private property and, crucially, the division of labor that Smith championed.
He wasn't buying it.
Not at all. He didn't see the division of labor as a positive force connecting independent individuals or creating universal wealth. Instead, he argued it was something that alienates humans.
Alienates. How so?
It degrades individuals, turning them into mere cogs in the production process, stripping them of their creativity and autonomy. This alienation isn't just from the final product you make, it's from your own labor, from your fellow humans in what should be a cooperative process, and ultimately from your own human essence, your species being, as he called it.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about unfair wages. It's about losing your humanity in the process.
That's the core of the critique. This process, where humans who ought to be conscious, creative subjects are instead objectified, reduced to tools in a system, is, for Marx, the central flaw of capitalism. And at its very root, enabling this pervasive alienation is the system of private property itself, particularly the private ownership of the means of production, the factories, the land, the tools.
And this changes everything about how we think about revolution, doesn't it? Because Locke's concept of the right to revolution was strictly political.
Right. Change the government if it becomes tyrannical.
If it violated the social contract, if it ceased to protect the people's natural rights, then the people had the right to change that government. It wasn't about overthrowing the entire political system or its economic underpinnings, just replacing a bad leader with a better one.
But Marx went much further.
Much further. Marx argued that to truly change things, you must radically alter the state system, because society itself, by virtue of capitalism, is in a state contrary to its ideals. He believed that the political state is ultimately just a reflection of the underlying economic class structure.
So fixing the reflection doesn't fix the source.
Precisely. For Marx, unless society changes fundamentally, politics will not change either. It will simply reflect the underlying economic power dynamics. It's a systemic problem requiring a systemic root and branch solution. Now let's fast forward from these 19th century critiques and bring them right into the 21st century with a modern Marxist lens, specifically through the fascinating and, let's be honest, often bewildering concept of financialization.
Ah, yes, financialization.
Yeah.
A big buzzword, but what does it actually mean from this perspective?
From a Marxist political economy perspective, financialization isn't just about, say, banks getting bigger. It's understood as the increasing presence of interest-bearing capital, or IBC, and the expansion of what's called fictitious capital in both intensive and extensive forms.
Okay, IBC and fictitious capital. Let's break those down.
Definitely. And this isn't just fancy academic jargon. It means this view challenges mainstream economics by suggesting financialization isn't just about market imperfections to be optimized away, but a fundamental systemic shift that creates deep inherent problems. It's really confined to what we call heterodoxy in economics, because it's seen as systemic and dynamic, not reducible to the standard optimizing and efficiency concerns.
Right. Mainstream economics often sees finance as just efficiently allocating capital, maybe with some hiccups. This sounds like a much more critical view.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Marx himself made a crucial distinction between money used as simple credit and money used as capital. Think about it. When you borrow money for a holiday, or maybe to cover a short-term need, that's simple credit. You pay it back, possibly with interest, straightforward enough.
Okay, like a personal loan or a credit card for consumption.
Exactly. But money used as capital, specifically interest-bearing capital, IBC, is different. Here, money is borrowed not just to buy something you need, but to make more money to generate a profit.
So borrowing to invest in a business, for example.
Right. From a capitalist production perspective, this happens when money is borrowed to expand accumulation, to build new factories, hire more workers, with the clear anticipation of a profit. It's about leveraging money to generate more wealth, often through productive activity.
Okay, so IBC is money intended to make more money, usually through production.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit unsettling. When this interest-bearing capital, or IBC, starts circulating independently in paper form, think claims on loans, shares, derivatives, all those complex financial assets, Marx termed it fictitious capital.
Fictitious? Why fictitious? It seems real enough people trade it.
Good question. It's fictitious not because it doesn't exist. You can certainly trade these papers for real money. It's fictitious because its monetary value, its market price, may not actually correspond to the potential to realize that value in real productive activity like building cars or growing food.
Ah, so the paper value can get detached from the underlying real economy.
Exactly. Imagine the market value of a tech company's shares soaring into the stratosphere, far beyond what its physical factories are actually producing or what its services are truly generating intangible wealth. This disconnect leads to a potential divergence between the dynamics of fictitious capital and real capital.
And that sounds like bubble territory.
Precisely. It gives rise to those speculative booms where asset prices rise disproportionately, often fueled by optimism and easy credit, only to come crashing down when the bubble bursts. Think of it like a massive game of musical chairs with promises of future value. As long as the music is playing and everyone believes in the value of these promises, the assets soar.
But if the music stops?
Or someone tries to cash in on the actual productive value, there might not be enough chairs, enough real value to go around, leading to a crash. We've seen this play out time and again, haven't we? Dot-com bubbles, housing crises.
Indeed. Marx further elaborated on this with the concept of loanable money capital, or LMC. Money markets, by their very nature, tend to conceal this fundamental division between money as simple credit, like your consumer loan, and money as capital, money used to make more money.
So LMC is the general pool of money available for lending.
Essentially, yes. LMC describes this common pool of money where these distinct functions come together, ultimately determining the interest rate. Now, interest-bearing capital is absolutely essential for large-scale competitive accumulation and increasing productivity. It allows businesses to expand and innovate at a speed never before possible.
So it's not inherently bad, it fuels growth.
It fuels growth, yes. However, this very power also makes it potentially destabilizing, precisely because fictitious capital can, and often does, run ahead of real capital, creating significant vulnerabilities and systemic risks in the system. It's the engine of growth, but also the source of much financial volatility.
So this idea of financialization isn't just an abstract economic concept. It's seen by these critics as the economic core of neoliberalism, which is arguably the most prominent characteristic of the current period of capitalism, stretching back several decades now.
The era we're all living in, basically.
Right. And this is where we see the state playing a surprisingly contradictory role. Despite neoliberalism's core ideology of limited state intervention and unfettered free markets.
Less government, more market.
Right. That's the rhetoric. But in practice, it has always been associated with a strong, even authoritarian state. The advanced neoliberal state's primary role isn't to shrink into irrelevance, but rather to actively promote the interests and internationalization of capital in general, and finance in particular.
So the state isn't stepping back, it's actively shaping the market for finance.
That's the argument. Think about deregulation. It often doesn't mean less government, but rather re-regulation that facilitates interest-bearing capital's access to new activities it was previously excluded from, like new financial products or privatized public services.
Opening up new frontiers for financial profit.
Exactly. And the massive state rescues of finance, like the multi-trillion-dollar bailouts after the 2008 crisis, followed by austerity measures imposed on the general public, vividly exemplify this contradictory hegemony.
That's a stark paradox, isn't it? Preach free markets, then bail out the biggest players when they fail, and impose cuts on everyone else.
It's truly a head-scratcher.
Yeah.
On one hand, neoliberalism preaches minimal state intervention, yet in crises, massive state bailouts of financial institutions. Then the same governments impose austerity, cutting social services. This reveals from this perspective that financial interests exert such powerful influence that the state prioritizes their stability, even if it contradicts its own stated free market principles and impacts the broader population.
It's quite revealing about where the power lies.
And think about this. Despite what should have been incredibly favorable conditions over the past 3 decades of neoliberalism, we're talking explosive new technologies, the triumph of free market ideology seemingly globally, China entering the global system providing vast labor, weakening trade unions, an abundance of flexible labor supply.
All the ingredients for a massive boom, you'd think.
Right. Yet the world experienced relatively slow growth compared to the post-war boom. And then, of course, we had the worst crisis in nearly a century in 2008.
So why didn't those favorable conditions lead to sustained prosperity?
From this Marxist perspective, the reason is that financialization governed much of the economic and social restructuring. This relentless focus on financial profits and fictitious capital ended up reducing effective investment in real production and undermining the broader social conditions needed for sustainable long-term accumulation and general prosperity.
So finance crowded out the real economy in a way.
That's the argument. It was all about the fictitious, sometimes the expense of the real.
And what stands out is that this financialization isn't uniform across the globe, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Its intensive form, the growth of financial assets detached from real production, like complex derivatives, and its extensive form, the extension of interest-bearing capital to new areas like mortgages for ordinary households, or even the privatization of essential public services such as water utilities, are profoundly unevenly distributed globally.
Where has it been most pronounced?
The United States and the UK, for instance, have really led the way in this financialization process. And arguably, they've reaped the most benefits, or at least their financial sectors have. This clearly relates to the powerful, dominant position of their financial corporations on the world stage and the global roles of their reserve currencies like the dollar and the pound.
So it's also a story about global power dynamics and inequality between nations.
Absolutely. It's not just an internal economic shift within nations, but a global power dynamic that exacerbates global inequalities. Now, within Marxism itself, it's not a single, perfectly unified voice on financialization. It's a really interesting internal discussion, particularly between two prominent thinkers, Ben Fine and Kostas Lapavitsas, concerning its precise definition and, crucially, its implications.
Okay, so even within this critical framework, there's debate. What's the difference?
For Ben Fine, financialization is understood as the increasing incorporation of interest-bearing capital into the circuits of capital across a much wider range of hybrid forms, with its reach extending across economic and social restructuring. Crucially for Fine, IBC involves the selling of mortgages bundled into assets like mortgage-backed securities, where the expectation of surplus doesn't lie in the initial act of mortgage lending itself, but in the subsequent trading and speculative activity around these complex financial instruments.
So it's more about finance creating and trading complex products based on underlying debt.
That seems to be Fine's emphasis. It's about how financial products become commodities themselves, traded and leveraged.
In Lapavitsas, how does he see it?
Lapavitsas takes a distinctly different and perhaps more direct stance. He connects interest-bearing capital much more directly to things like mortgage lending itself and sees financialization as essentially exploiting household or wage revenues.
So finance extracting value directly from ordinary people's incomes?
That's the idea. For him, it's a profiting without producing model that exploits us all. A broader, more direct form of financial extraction from the general population, where finance is siphoning off a greater and greater share of ordinary people's incomes.
And what's his proposed solution?
Because of this view, he advocates for direct state ownership of finance, believing it's the necessary, radical step to enable alternative industrial and social policies that would genuinely benefit everyone, not just a financial elite.
That's a pretty bold proposal, total state control of banking and finance.
It is. And this raises an important question, is where the rubber meets the road in terms of policy implications. Fine critiques Lapavitsas' view, arguing that it blurs the crucial distinction between interest-bearing capital and simple credit, potentially misinterprets the nature of the value of labor power, and can sometimes treat financialization too broadly, almost like a pre-capitalist form of usury, rather than a distinct feature of modern capitalism.
So Fine thinks Lapavitsas' definition is maybe too simple or confuses different types of financial activity.
That seems to be the core of the critique. The insight here is that while both identify financialization as a problem, their differing definitions lead to wildly different proposed solutions. Fine argues that understanding financialization's impact requires acknowledging the variegated ways it attaches to economic and social outcomes. These outcomes are provision-specific. Meaning, for example, that the impact of housing finance via mortgages is fundamentally different from how water provision is impacted by privatization, even if both involve finance.
So you can't just lump it all together.
Right. A generalized call for blanket state ownership of finance, while seemingly straightforward, might miss these crucial distinctions and lead to less effective or even unintended consequences. Fine might advocate for more nuanced, targeted regulatory interventions instead.
So it's a complex, nuanced debate even within a shared theoretical framework. It highlights that even when you agree on the problem, the solution can be hotly contested.
So we've explored some pretty big theoretical concepts. But what do these ideas, this tension between market forces and state control look like when they hit the real world, when they shape actual human lives? Let's try to imagine someone, let's call him Javier.
Okay, yeah.
He opened a small furniture workshop in Chile in the 1990s, a period when the country was really embracing free market reforms. Now, Javier was a true believer in the invisible hand. He worked tirelessly, invested his savings, hired a few neighbors, and his business, built on craftsmanship and honest prices, grew steadily.
Living the dream, essentially. The market rewarding hard work.
Exactly. He genuinely felt that the free market, without government meddling, was rewarding his effort and skill. He was proud, a living testament, you might say, to Adam Smith's ideals of self-interest leading to social good. He probably thought government was best when it was almost invisible.
Okay, I can picture him. Then what happens?
Then disaster struck. The The 2008 global financial crisis hit, sending shockwaves across the globe, even to a small furniture workshop in Chile. Demand from his international clients just vanished overnight as global economies contracted.
Ouch. The connections that helped him grow suddenly dried up.
Completely. And the price of the imported specialized wood he needed skyrocketed, making his materials unaffordable. Suddenly, the invisible hand that had lifted him up felt less like a gentle guide and more like a crushing fist pushing him down. His small business, his life's work, teetered on the edge of bankruptcy.
That's brutal and completely outside his control.
Totally. And here's the kicker. He saw larger, politically connected corporations, some of whom had maybe engaged in far riskier practices, getting massive government bailouts. Meanwhile, his own workshop, which had played by all the rules, was left struggling.
That must have felt incredibly unfair.
Agonizingly so. Javier found himself in the position of having to lobby the local government for a support grant, a form of state intervention he had philosophically opposed his entire life. He wasn't just fighting for his business. He was fighting with his own deeply held beliefs about how the world should work.
Javier's story isn't just a simple tale of economic hardship, is it? It's a powerful illustration of the inherent tension between ideology and reality.
Absolutely.
In a stable, prosperous world, the theoretical elegance of the invisible hand, guiding individuals to collective good, is incredibly appealing and appears to function beautifully. But in a crisis, when the market forces turn destructive, the call for a safety net, for state intervention, for a helping hand where the invisible one has failed, becomes a deeply human and pragmatic response.
You do what you have to do to survive.
Right. This highlights how diverse national economies are constantly navigating this incredibly difficult balance, often forced to compromise their stated principles to ensure social and economic stability. It's a constant, dynamic dance between abstract market forces and concrete governmental oversight, often driven by necessity rather than pure conviction.
And that tension is precisely where socialism enters the conversation as a robust counterargument to classical economic liberalism. While economic liberalism champions radical individualism, arguing that society is merely a collection of self-interested actors.
Socialism emphasizes human interdependence. It argues that free and equal individuals construct society by being inherently interdependent within various relationships, social, economic, familial. This collective spirit, rather than pure self-interest, is seen as driving human endeavor and societal well-being.
So the fundamentally different view of human nature and society.
Yes. And socialism, in practice, advocates for greater government intervention in economic activities, often quite dramatically, such as nationalization of key industries and infrastructure. The goal is clear: to rectify the social inequalities and injustices that arise from unfettered market forces.
Okay, but both sides still see a role for the state, right?
It's worth noting that both economic liberalism and socialism actually recognize the necessity of the state. The state is seen as a social safety mechanism, a guarantor of order. However, their fundamental clash is over control and purpose.
How so?
Socialism, drawing an analogy perhaps to the Roman Republic, might view the government as protecting the interests of the working class, the plebeians, against the wealthy capitalist class, the aristocracy. But, and this is a critical cautionary point, this very advocacy for a strong state can risk state oppression of society itself if not carefully balanced with democratic principles and robust individual liberties. History is full of examples.
That's a crucial caveat. So for Marx, going back to him, the problem isn't necessarily that markets don't work efficiently. He certainly observed the incredible productive power of capitalism.
He was awestruck by it in some ways.
The problem is that capitalism itself has inherent structural flaws that inevitably lead to poverty, exploitation, and widening disparities. He revealed this by critically examining classical economics, arguing that if poverty persists, if economic crises recur, it's not because people are lazy or the market is temporarily disrupted. It's because the system itself, by its very design, generates these outcomes as part of its normal functioning, particularly through the drive for profit and competition.
So crises and inequality aren't bugs, they're features of the system, in his view.
That's the core argument. And many critics, following this line of reasoning, associate capitalism with a whole host of profoundly negative consequences. They point to pervasive social inequality, the unfair distribution of wealth and power, the rise of market monopolies that stifle competition, even imperialism as an outward expression of capitalist expansion, exploitation of labor, and a pervasive materialism that values profit over people.
That's quite a list.
It is. They argue it leads to the repression of workers, profound social alienation, Chronic economic instability characterized by boom and bust cycles, and the recurring, deeply damaging problem of unemployment. These aren't just minor glitches in the system. They're seen as systemic outputs, direct consequences of capitalism's fundamental logic.
It's a powerful critique whether one agrees with it fully or not.
Absolutely. This complex interplay of market forces, inequality, and state intervention has actually led to the emergence of a fascinating, modern hybrid system, state capitalism. This isn't just a minor tweak. It represents a significant paradigm shift in the world economy.
State capitalism, what exactly does that entail?
In this system, the state maintains significant ownership of the means of production within a country, but importantly, these state enterprises are organized and operated as commercial, profit-seeking businesses. It's not your grandfather's lumbering, inefficient nationalization program from the mid-20th century.
Okay, so the state owns, but acts like a private company.
Largely, yes. What's truly fascinating here is how today's state capitalism radically differs from its predecessors. Governments aren't just appointing bureaucrats to passively run companies anymore. The world's largest state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, are often traded on public markets, meaning they're subject to some market discipline, and they're maintained by large institutional investors.
So they have shareholders, market pressures.
They behave very much like private sector multinationals, competing globally, seeking profits, expanding market share. But here's the crucial difference. They have the implicit, or often explicit, backing of the state.
Which gives them certain advantages, presumably.
A powerful combination, giving them significant leverage, access to cheaper capital perhaps, and a different set of priorities, often long-term strategic national goals, compared to purely private entities driven solely by quarterly returns.
And you say this model is flourishing.
Absolutely flourishing, particularly in East Asian economies, posing a serious, undeniable challenge to traditional free market capitalism. When you look at the global landscape today, you see tangible monuments to this new hybrid. Think of the iconic China Central Television Building, or Malaysia's soaring Petronas Towers, or the sprawling operations of Russia's VTB Bank.
Right, those are huge entities. Is this entirely new, though?
Well, historically, the British East India Company, a state-backed entity, paved the way for the British Empire, so in a sense it's a repetition of history, or maybe old wine in a new bottle.
Yeah.
But the current scale is truly unprecedented.
How big are we talking?
The world's top 10 big oil and gas companies, for example, are all public sector entities. State-owned companies now hold a staggering 80% of Chinese and 62% of Russian stock markets. They're aggressively capturing new markets and industries globally, accounting for a massive 30% of world foreign direct investment in 2010 alone. And the sheer scale. China Mobile has over 600 million customers.
Wow. That's definitely not a fringe phenomenon. It's a major force shaping the global economy.
Undeniably.
What's driving this rise? Why now?
Several intertwined factors. The chaos of wild privatization in Russia in the 1990s, where state assets were rapidly and often corruptly transferred to private hands, served as a stark warning to many emerging countries.
They saw the downsides of a rapid, uncontrolled shift to private ownership.
Exactly. It spurred the belief that governments could actively mitigate the strains of capitalism and globalization by providing soft infrastructure through flagship corporations. This new model bears little resemblance to the disastrous, often inefficient nationalizations of the past.
They're more sophisticated now.
Much more. Chinese infrastructure companies, for instance, are not just building within their borders. They are winning global contracts, constructing roads, ports, and power plants across continents. And national champions acquire critical skills and capital by listing on foreign exchanges and strategically taking over foreign companies. The state isn't just intervening to save failing industries, it's strategically cultivating global economic powerhouses with a long-term vision.
So it's a deliberate strategy for national development and global influence.
It certainly seems so. These state capitalist governments are highly strategic, utilizing a formidable range of tools to maintain power and exploit markets for broader political and economic goals. This includes direct influence over national oil and gas corporations, various state-owned enterprises, even privately owned national champions that receive state support, and increasingly massive sovereign wealth funds.
Sovereign wealth funds, huge pools of state-controlled investment capital.
Precisely. And we see concrete, powerful examples of this strategic influence everywhere. Saudi Arabia leverages its massive oil revenues to secure political allegiance. Ukraine's government owns vast tracts of agricultural land and holds stakes in key industries. Russia applies restrictions on foreign investment in strategic sectors. India involves itself deeply in politically sensitive products like food and fuel. Mexico has its massive government-owned oil company, Pemex.
And China.
China, of course, provides immense financial assistance and strategic direction to companies interested in foreign investments in key economic sectors, giving them an unparalleled competitive edge in global markets. It's a very intentional top-down strategy.
This brings us to a crucial, ongoing debate: whether this rapid expansion of state capitalism signals the end of free market capitalism as we knew it.
It certainly challenges the narrative that prevailed after the Cold War.
The 2008 credit crisis definitely accelerated the rise of state capitalism as a perceived alternative economic system, didn't it? It showed the vulnerabilities of the Western model.
It did. And it leveraged state power and overtly manipulated corporate powers to achieve national goals. This raises an important question. Many globalization economic theories that predicted a boundless, inevitable free market have simply proved faulty.
What kind of theories?
For instance, the claims that the nation-state has been eliminated as a significant economic actor, or that government should only discipline the market as it had no business experience, or even that large corporations are larger than governments, have all been proven spectacularly wrong in the face of state capitalism's resurgence.
The state came roaring back, in a sense.
Absolutely. The assertion that democratic capitalism has established its victory all over the world appears to be, at best, a fallacy.
Indeed, instead, we're witnessing governments increasingly establishing their grip over markets and autocracy, or at least powerful centralized control, gaining dominance over pure democracy in many parts of the world. State capitalism is expanding rapidly in emerging economies, backed by strong financial resources and massive sovereign wealth funds that dwarf those of many private entities.
It's a potent challenge to the free market paradigm, demonstrating a fundamentally different, often highly effective, path to economic power and global influence. It's forcing us all to rethink deeply held assumptions about the inevitable triumph of market liberalization.
So we touched upon this already, but let's really dig into the philosophical evolution of private property rights, starting back with John Locke's labor theory.
Right, the idea that mixing your labor makes something yours.
This foundational idea posits that property is justly acquired when individuals mix their labor with unowned natural resources. It intuitively links ownership directly to effort and production. You work the land, you build on it, you create something, it becomes yours.
It feels right, doesn't it? It's about earning your keep, building something tangible. It has a strong moral appeal.
It does.
I heard a story from a colleague who was documenting land disputes in Southeast Asia. She told me about a village in Cambodia, a community that had farmed the same ancestral land for generations. Right. Their concept of ownership wasn't based on a dusty piece of paper or a legal deed locked away in some far-off city office. No, their ownership was written directly in the soil through their collective labor, in the graves of their ancestors that dotted the landscape, and in the vibrant, unbroken collective memory of the village.
A very different understanding of ownership, rooted in history and community, not just individual legal title.
Exactly. This was their property in a way John Locke might have profoundly understood. Their life, their history, their very being was mixed with the land. But then one day, a foreign corporation, armed with a legal title purchased from the central government, arrived with bulldozers, claiming the land for a massive commercial plantation.
Oh no, based solely on a piece of paper.
Based solely on this modern abstract concept of private property rights, a legal document completely disconnected from the labor, history, or ancestral ties of those who lived there. The villagers were declared trespassers on land their families had inhabited for centuries, their homes bulldozed, their crops destroyed.
That's devastating. Try to imagine that feeling, being told your history, your hard work, your home are meaningless against a document you've never seen.
It's a stark, human illustration of how abstract ideas can clash with lived realities.
That story forces us to confront a profound modern dilemma in the complex evolution of property rights. In today's globalized world, where vast legal power and immense capital can purchase property titles completely disconnected from the labor, history, or even the ancestral ties of those who live on the land, it raises a critical question.
Which is?
Does this system still serve to genuinely reward effort and industriousness, as Locke perhaps envisioned? Or has it evolved into a powerful tool that exacerbates wealth disparities, essentially legitimizing dispossession and disempowerment on a grand scale?
It's a powerful reminder that even foundational ideas, when applied in vastly different contexts and with vastly different power dynamics, can have devastating real-world consequences, transforming what was meant to secure freedom into a mechanism for profound injustice.
And this brings us to some fascinating empirical evidence regarding property rights and their impact on inequality. Recent research has delved back into the property rights inequality nexus, but with a new, much more refined approach.
How so? What's new?
They've constructed a new index called the Property Rights Protection Index, or PRP. What's crucial about this index is that it meticulously combines 18 different indicators from various sources and focuses solely on property rights protection.
Ah, so it tries to isolate just the effect of property rights, unlike older measures.
Exactly. It avoids mixing in unrelated factors like violent crime rates or military interference that sometimes got bundled into rule of law measures, which could muddy the waters. This advanced methodology also accounts for data gaps and measurement uncertainty, giving us a much clearer, more precise picture.
Okay, so what did this clearer picture reveal?
So the first key finding from this new research is that increases in property rights are found to be positively and statistically associated with increased net income inequality.
Wait, stronger property rights are linked to more inequality. That seems counterintuitive to the idea that secure property helps everyone.
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance, but it means that, on their own, stronger property rights tend to worsen income distribution, making the rich richer and the poor relatively poorer. This aligns with arguments that property rights can exacerbate inequality if they're designed in a way that disproportionately benefits and perpetuates the interests of already advantaged minorities.
How might that work in practice?
Well, one argument is that governments may find it more convenient or beneficial to protect the property rights of those who yield the highest returns, like the wealthy or the established middle class, for instance, because they contribute more in tax revenue. This focus can inadvertently lead to an inevitable increase in inequality if the rights of the less advantaged aren't equally prioritized, or if the system facilitates accumulation at the top. It's a stark challenge to the idea that property rights are inherently egalitarian.
Okay, that's a significant finding.
Yeah.
What else did this study show?
Another really surprising finding is that democracy, when considered independently, has no direct effect on inequality.
No direct effect. So just having elections doesn't automatically reduce income gaps.
Apparently not, according to this study. This goes against a fairly common assumption that simply having democratic institutions will automatically lead to more equitable income distribution. It suggests democracy alone isn't a silver bullet for evening out incomes, at least not directly.
Okay, so property rights, increase inequality, democracy has no direct effect. Is there any good news here?
But here's where it gets really interesting and frankly quite hopeful. The estimated coefficient of the interaction term between property rights and democracy is negative and statistically significant.
Interaction term, meaning how they work together.
Exactly. This suggests that in high democracies, meaning countries with very robust democratic institutions, scoring around 8.26 to 9 on a scale of 10 on the Democracy Index property rights actually significantly decrease net income inequality.
Ah, so strong property rights can reduce inequality, but only when combined with strong democracy.
That's what the evidence suggests. The beneficial effect of strong property rights on reducing inequality only truly kicks in when a country also has a very robust, functioning democratic system. It's the combination that seems to be key, not just one factor in isolation.
Okay, that makes more sense. So what's the mechanism? How does democracy change the impact of property rights?
The mechanism behind these effects primarily runs through the government's redistribution mechanisms, specifically taxes and transfers.
So it's about what the government does with the money generated in the economy.
Precisely. When the analysis focuses on market income inequality, that's income before any taxes or transfers are applied, both property rights and democracy become statistically insignificant.
Okay, so neither directly affects the income people get straight from the market.
Right. This is entirely consistent with the theory that strong property rights, by clarifying ownership and maybe reducing the costs and size of the informal economy, make it easier for governments to identify and tax economic activity.
Okay, clear rules make taxation easier.
And, crucially, in democracies, there's a greater political propensity, or maybe pressure, for the government to then redistribute these collected funds through social programs, education, welfare, and other transfers, thereby mitigating inequality.
So property rights help generate the taxable base, and democracy provides the political will to redistribute it.
It's that powerful combination, clear property rights and a democratic impulse to redistribute, that makes the real difference in addressing income disparities, according to this research.
Fascinating. And you mentioned this new PRP index is better measured.
Yes, and to truly appreciate these findings, it's worth understanding the nuance of how this new property rights protection PRP index is measured. It's available for a broad range of 191 countries from 1994 to 2015, filling many gaps found in older indicators. And as we said, it's specifically designed to disentangle the effect of property rights from the overall quality of the judicial system itself. What's fascinating here, statistically speaking, is that while the PRP index is highly correlated with the level of development, cross-sectionally meaning, if you look at all countries at any given year, wealthier countries tend to possess strong property rights, with correlations as high as 0.8.
Right. Rich countries usually have strong property laws. That seems obvious.
But when only changes over time within a country are considered, the correlation actually becomes negative at -0.21.
Negative. So strengthening property rights over time is linked to less development. That seems weird.
It might sound like a technical detail, but it reveals something crucial. While rich countries generally have strong property rights, changes in those rights within a country don't automatically guarantee development in the short term, and might even correlate negatively in some periods. It suggests a much more complex, nonlinear relationship than often assumed.
So just passing stronger property laws isn't a magic bullet for development either.
It seems not. It hints that development is not just about strengthening property rights in isolation, but about a whole constellation of other factors, institutions, and crucially, how those rights are used, regulated, and combined with democratic redistribution.
We've talked a lot about systems and theories and how they play out in individual lives and national policies. But let's zoom in now on what many political economists, particularly those from a Marxist tradition, have long viewed as capitalism's Achilles heel.
Its inherent instabilities, right? The boom and bust cycles.
Exactly. Its inherent instabilities and the seemingly relentless recurrence of economic crises. These aren't just seen as minor bumps in the road or external shocks. They're viewed as deep structural weaknesses woven into the very fabric of the system.
What are some of these key weaknesses or contradictions?
Well, one is what's called the problem of disproportionality. Imagine a vast, complex economy where different sectors are producing different things. Some making steel for new factories, capital goods, others making shoes and smartphones, consumer goods.
Okay, different parts of the production chain.
Right. Without any central planning or coordination, it's incredibly difficult to ensure that the output of one sector perfectly matches the needs of another. The increased complexity of modern industry makes structural imbalances highly likely. You might have an overproduction of steel, but not enough demand for it, or too many consumer goods, but not enough purchasing power.
So, mismatches between supply and demand across different sectors.
Precisely. This anarchy of capitalist production, as Marxists call it, where decisions are decentralized and driven by individual profit motives, can trigger widespread recession due to these gluts and shortages across the economy. It's the unpredictable nature of an uncoordinated system, a chaotic dance between supply and demand that frequently trips over its own feet.
Makes sense. Why us?
Then there's the truly counterintuitive concept of the tendency of the falling profit rate.
Yes, this one is tricky. Capitalism is about profit, so how can the rate fall?
It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? The argument goes like this. As capitalists invest more and more in machines, automation, and technology, what Marx called constant capital, and relatively less in human labor power, variable capital, there's a long-term tendency for the average rate of profit for capitalist industry as a whole to be squeezed.
Why? Because machines don't create new value in the same way labor does, in this theory.
That's the core idea in Marx's view. Only living labor creates new surplus value. So as you replace human labor with machines, even if it boosts efficiency and total profits initially, the rate at which new value is created relative to the total capital invested, machines plus labor costs, tends to decline over time.
So the drive for efficiency through automation paradoxically undermines the rate of profit itself.
That's the inherent tension identified. This relentless pursuit of capital accumulation, especially with labor-displacing technology, creates fundamental problems, often fueling anti-capitalist sentiments, regardless of whether profits are actually falling or buoyant in the short term. It pushes capitalists to constantly seek new ways to cut costs, often at the expense of labor, or to find new markets or financial schemes.
And unemployment fits into this picture too, right?
Absolutely. Unemployment is perhaps the most visible and devastating manifestation of capitalism's structural contradictions. Marxists have always argued that a reserve army of labor, a pool of unemployed or underemployed workers, is integral to the accumulation process.
Why integral? How does it help capitalists?
It serves to keep wages down through competition for jobs and disciplines the working class, ensuring a ready supply of cheap labor when needed for expansion. Keynesians, coming from a different perspective, also emphasize that there's no inherent tendency toward full employment in a capitalist system. Markets can reach equilibrium with significant unemployment. And we see this today with jobless growth.
Exactly. The rise of jobless growth in the neoliberal era, where economies expand but create few new jobs, gravely questions wage labor as the principal means of income distribution and social stability. It asks a profound question. If fewer and fewer people are needed for productive work due to automation and efficiency, how will income be distributed to the masses? What happens to social cohesion when vast swaths of the population are potentially surplus to the requirements of capital?
That's a deeply unsettling question for the future. And closely related to that is the issue of underconsumption.
Right. If people don't have jobs or good wages, who buys all the stuff being produced?
Precisely. If wage incomes are pushed down or made more unequal, the crucial question arises. Who will buy the outputs of this massive, increasingly efficient production process? If ordinary people can't afford the goods being produced, then demand collapses.
Does luxury spending or government spending fill the gap?
While luxury consumption by the wealthy and state expenditure can absorb some of the surplus, global competition continues to put downward pressure on wages across the board for many. This creates a chronic problem where the system's ability to produce outstrips the population's ability to consume, leading to cycles of overproduction and crisis.
Which leads directly to the phenomenon of consumerism, doesn't it? Trying to stimulate that demand.
It does. To counter underconsumption, capitalism constantly generates new product development waves. Electronics, mobile phones, fashion trends, often promoted by relentless commercial advertising, and, some argue, built-in obsolescence.
Making things designed to break or go out of style so we buy more.
That's the critique. This fosters an insatiable drive for consumption. But this pursuit of contrived wants can be patently unsatisfying, leading to what some describe as a triumph of material wants over humanity, an enormous social waste through discarded goods and planned obsolescence. It's an endless, often unfulfilling cycle of production and consumption.
And circling back to finance, there's casino capitalism.
Yes. That term vividly describes the system's increasing dependence on credit proliferation and complex financial engineering, which makes it inherently vulnerable to financial crises. The banking crisis of 2007-2008, for example, exposed this profound fragility in shocking detail.
That was a wake-up call for many.
It certainly was. Alan Greenspan, the long-serving former Federal Reserve chair, famously admitted that the whole intellectual edifice collapsed regarding the self-interest of financial organizations, meaning the belief that financial institutions driven by their own greed would somehow self-regulate and ensure stability. Well, that belief crumbled.
A pretty stunning admission from someone at the heart of the system.
It vividly illustrates the system's inherent instability, showing how a focus on abstract financial assets and risky speculation can profoundly destabilize the real economy and cause widespread suffering.
And of course, a critical modern critique points to capitalism's fundamental environmental unsustainability.
Right. The elephant in the room, perhaps?
Its relentless requirement for continual economic growth, for ever-increasing reduction in consumption, means a rapacious and unsustainable use of the physical environment and finite natural resources. Critics argue that this makes it an inherently unsustainable system in the long run, given the ecological limits of our planet. The pursuit of profit often overrides concerns for environmental degradation, leading to a long-term crisis that threatens the very foundations of human existence.
So with all these inherent contradictions and critiques laid out, disproportionality,
Right.
falling profits, unemployment, underconsumption, consumerism, financial instability, environmental damage, what's the real-world outcome we actually observe, particularly regarding inequality?
Well, despite arguments that economic growth will simply trickle down and benefit everyone eventually, the facts unfortunately suggest otherwise. Income inequality is not only increasing in many Western countries, but it's becoming a serious social and economic issue, threatening stability and opportunity.
Do we have data on that?
Empirically, the data is stark. The share of top income recipients in total gross income has grown significantly over the past 3 decades in most countries studied. In the U.S., for example, the richest 1% more than doubled their share of pre-tax income since 1980, reaching almost 20% in 2012.
1/5 of the income going to the top 1%. Wow.
And we've seen large increases in Australia, Canada, Ireland, and the UK as well. This isn't just a minor shift, it's a profound, systemic reconcentration of wealth at the very top.
So much for trickle-down economics, then.
It seems largely unsupported by this data. The supposed benefits of growth simply haven't reached lower-income households in the same way. In fact, they've often fallen further behind. Consider this. In the United States, the average income of the poorest 10% actually fell by 10% in real terms between 2000 and 2008, and by a further 7% between 2008 and 2010.
Fell. Even as the overall economy grew in some of those years.
Yes. And while the average American income is far richer than most OECD citizens, the poorest 10% of Americans make only 73 cents for every dollar earned by their OECD counterparts on average. That's a stark human illustration of inequality's persistent and widening cost at the bottom.
And does this affect people's ability to move up the ladder? Social mobility?
It appears so. Studies consistently show that social mobility, a child's ability to climb the income ladder relative to their parents, tends to be significantly lower in more unequal societies. The U.S., for instance, which we just noted has high income inequality, is notably less mobile than most other developed societies in international comparison.
So inequality becomes entrenched across generations.
It reinforces the idea that inequality isn't just about current incomes. It deeply impacts future opportunities and entrenches economic status across generations. The American dream seems harder to achieve in a highly unequal America.
And the 2008 financial crisis, which we discussed earlier, how did that impact households?
It only amplified these existing issues. The Great Recession significantly affected household market income in many OECD countries. In the U.S., market income fell by 5% between 2008 and 2010. Even larger falls, a staggering 10% or more, occurred in places like Iceland, Greece, Estonia, Spain, Ireland, and Mexico.
And what drove those income falls mainly?
Primarily surging unemployment, highlighting again how systemic economic shocks disproportionately impact those at the bottom of the economic ladder, widening the cracks in the system.
Beyond the purely economic numbers, unfettered capitalism also faces significant philosophical and religious critiques, doesn't it? Questioning its very moral foundation.
Absolutely. Many religions across diverse traditions, including traditional Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have historically criticized or even outright forbidden practices like lending money at interest, viewing it as usury or unjust enrichment.
That's a long history of ethical concern about finance.
It is. More recently, Pope Francis, for example, has been a vocal critic, describing unfettered capitalism as a new tyranny and explicitly calling upon world leaders to fight rising poverty and inequality, emphasizing a moral imperative beyond mere economic efficiency. These aren't just economic arguments, they are profound ethical challenges.
And from a broader philosophical standpoint, what are the concerns?
Critics argue that capitalist economies tend to prioritize profits and capital accumulation above all else, often neglecting the social needs and well-being of communities. They point out that capitalist enterprises rarely include workers in basic decisions, leading to a sense of disempowerment and alienation, echoing Marx's earlier points.
So it's about values, about what kind of society we prioritize.
Exactly. This leads to concerns about excessive materialism, a relentless pursuit of consumption, and a fundamental inability, some argue, to account for the holistic well-being of all people, not just those who generate the highest returns or accumulate the most capital. It's a critique of its very ethical and human foundation, asking what kind of society we are building when profit becomes the ultimate metric. #outro.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been. We've journeyed from John Locke's idea of a political reset button for governments all the way to Marx's radical call for a full-scale economic revolution, arguing that true change must upend society's economic foundations.
Quite the journey. From political tweaks to societal upheaval.
We've wrestled with the elegant simplicity of Adam Smith's invisible hand, and then seen how modern realities, like those devastating financial crises, force us to question its universal reach and often demand significant state intervention, leading to the complex rise of state capitalism.
That tension between the market and the state seems ever present, doesn't it?
It really does. We've explored the very foundations of private property, from Locke's labor theory to its complicated role in both exacerbating and, fascinatingly, mitigating today's wealth disparities, especially when it's mediated by robust democracy.
That interaction between property rights and democracy was particularly striking.
Absolutely. And we've truly unpacked the inherent, enduring contradictions some see within capitalism, from disproportionality in production to the perils of casino capitalism, and the persistent, undeniable challenge of global inequality that refuses to simply trickle down.
What's truly fascinating here is how these monumental ideas aren't just academic debates confined to dusty university halls. They play out in the daily, very human lives of individuals like Javier in Chile, struggling with his small business, or the villagers in Cambodia facing the loss of their ancestral lands.
That's so true. These aren't just abstract concepts.
These ideas shape the policies of nations, determine who thrives and who struggles, and ultimately influence the very structure of our global economy. It becomes clear that the question of how should politics and society be changed is far from settled. It's an ongoing, dynamic struggle with no easy answers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really makes you consider the profound power structures underlying our world. I was reminded of a quote from Sir Josiah Stamp. He was one of the UK's richest men back in the 1920s, a director of the Bank of England.
Oh yeah, what did he say?
He famously said, "Banking was conceived in iniquity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with the flick of the pen, they will create enough deposits to buy it back again."
Wow, that's quite a statement, especially coming from a banker.
It's a provocative thought, isn't it? If the very creation of money, the fundamental lifeblood of our economic system, is seen by some, even insiders, as part of the mechanism creating these vast disparities, then perhaps the shifts needed to truly address them are far more fundamental than we commonly imagine. It suggests the questions might reach even into the very nature of currency and credit itself.